Okay, so we're here with Jared
Hi.
at Drift.
Yeah, Jared from Drift in Chicago.
Cool, and what have you brought to the show this year?
So we have Zero here, and Zero is all about playback, audio file playback, synced with hardware, groove boxes, and modular synths.
Excellent.
So we're kind of playing around in the space between DJing and live hardware performance.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it does have a full sort of 2-deck DJ interface, so you can sort of have your standard, deck 1, deck 2, crossfade sort of workflow. What I'm demoing here today is a sort of an audio send return workflow where you can sort of do live remixes based on sort of file playback and sending out clock, which is another thing that Zero does. I'll just sort of kick it off by playing. So what I have set up right now, deck 1 here, is playing an audio file from the internal hard drive. It's just an MP3 file played back. Currently I've turned off my syncing, so let me turn that back on. Playing back audio, it is using the audio output to do a send return. So I've got a dedicated channel coming out into the WASP filter here. And then from the WASP filter, I'm sending audio back into Zero. So what you're seeing is a waveform of the audio coming in, and above that you're seeing a waveform of the file that's being played back.
Wow.
And so if I open up the filter a little bit on the WASP, you can sort of hear what's going on there.
And is that just like deck 1 we're hearing effective?
That's correct, yeah. Okay. Deck 1 is hard routed out the send return loop. We have deck 1 playing. Deck 1 has beat grid, the system knows where the 1 is, which means that when we then send a clock out, which we can do, it will be quantized to the beat grid. So what I'm talking about is we can send, a 16th note pulse cycle on the 1 of the track that's playing back, right? So I'll just sort of hit play to show you a little bit more what I'm talking about. And so I've hit play, and what you see now is Steppy is being clocked on the 16th note. Steppy is sending a pattern filter through the ADSR back into the WASP. So if I start to bring up the frequency modulation a little bit, right, you can kind of start hearing a little bit of a groove that I've got sort of sequenced in. And so the idea is, okay, I've got a stem. I want to do a little bit of live remix work on top of it. I'm doing a performance at a show or something like that. This lets me kind of improvise over the top of it, right? It's sort of built for jamming. So because I'm clocking, I can play along with the groove, but also I've got a drum machine set up, and I can start introducing elements from that, right? So I can bring in a clap. And I'm sort of, at this point, I'm starting to actually build a live remix, right? So importantly, if we have, this deck here, this third deck that you're seeing, it lets us control both the audio coming in, it also lets us control the clock going out. So I can, for example, if I have it selected, I can use it to sort of nudge the clock into place, right? So if things start to drift a little bit, I've got a nudge here that lets me move that around.
Just like on a turntable.
That's exactly right. It's just a playback deck, only it's controlling the clock. So that's sort of the general idea is okay, I've got a remix, I can kind of groove on this a little bit. Right. And then because I've got a 2-deck DJ system here, I can then sort of bring in something over the top, right? So I can bring in a vocal or something like that, right? Let's try this. So I've got some cue points set up in here, right? I'll set up a loop on this track.
I was going to ask, can you set cue points and loop points?
That's right.
Well?
Yep. Yeah, we can set them internally on the device. We can also import them from a record box exported XML, nice. Right? So we read all that data.
Yeah.
So again, I will set a loop up. All right, and so this is deck 2. It's playing back on the fader of deck 2 here, right? So, all right, so I'm kind of bringing it in. And I can kind of nudge it into place a little bit. So yeah, so now I've got my groove kind of going, right? And I can kind of remix on top of it. Yeah. That's the idea.
And in terms of inputs and outputs,
Yeah.
what have you got to choose from on the top?
Right. So yeah, it's got 4 stereo inputs, or sorry, 2 stereo inputs and 2 stereo outputs, and those can be split up and sort of reconfigured in any way that you want to. So in this case, I've got the main left-right output going into the headphone amp. That's sort of what is driving the audio. But I've also got 1/2 of the other stereo out as the top of the send loop, right? That's where the audio's sort of going into WASP.
So splitting the stereo signal into 2 mono.
It's splitting the stereo signal into 1 mono, and then the other half of that is the clock signal.
Oh, great.
Right? So I can, if I'm brave and attempt this, so I can then adjust that clock signal to be like I can adjust the PPQ in, I can decouple it from the internal tempo if I want to run the clock at a different rate than the playback clock. Yeah.
It's got a superb UI as well.
Oh, thank you, yeah.
The menu that you were just flicking through looks really
yeah, so this is so the other thing is we have audio routing into it. I have currently the left and right signals both routing into this sort of external deck, which is just playing back behind the main sort of DJ mixer flow. But I can change that routing to be routed into the back of one of the 2 playback decks. So effectively, I can take my audio signal in and put it on one of the faders and sort of DJ with it like I would just anything else. Yeah.
And could you, for example, do a whole DJ set just using that?
Yeah,
like
it
you
is.
can mix from one side to the
That's
other?
That's absolutely right, yeah.
And what sort of memory cards is required and how much could you stick on it? And
Yeah.
what formats does it support
Right,
as well?
that's important. So it's a Linux machine, right? So it's running Linux. There is an internal eMMC drive sort of soldered to the board. 32 gigabytes of internal storage is the upshot of that. It is Linux Gadget Framework, so you just sort of plug it into your computer and it shows up like a thumb drive. But importantly, USB-C, we will have host mode implemented, so if you need more storage, you can just plug in a USB drive, right? Yeah.
And you said that you were playing an MP3 back. Can you take waves, AFs?
Yeah, lossy or
flat?
lossless. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that full format list is sort of on the roadmap, but yeah.
Great.
And then, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask about the turntable thing. Is there possible to scratch sounds?
Yeah, I'd give you a demo, but I actually broke it on the plane on the way over here. So yeah, it's a 24 pulse per revolution encoder. So it's not really like a super high quality like scratch. It's not designed for scratch turntablism, right? But you can bust out a convincing oh yeah, like yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And so, what's your roadmap for the release and like the price points?
Right. So where we're at right now, we are doing a pre-sale deposit program where you put down a little bit up front to pay the rest later, and that's to fund the production of our injection mold tooling. This is just a 3D printed prototype. The timeline on that, it's like a 4 to 5 month build. So yeah, once we get that funded, it's just about done. Once we have that funded, we start cutting steel. That process kicks off November-ish, and that puts us on a timeline to be out like late Q1 of 2025. Price point's going to be $499 US for the final ship, and it will ship directly from Chicago.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And well, it sounds great. It looks great. We really look forward to seeing it out in the open.
Thank you so much.